everybody. This is the Certified Sarah Ballers, and welcome to our podcast on balancing burnout.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for coming back to our podcast. We're the Certified Cerebralers. And we're here to discuss burnout, and we hope to demystify the topic within the medical field. Again, I'm Lauren.
My name is Michael.
And I'm Caitlin.
And today we have another special guest, Dr. Amanda Loucks, who's a family medicine physician. And we're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Loucks, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
So I work in Harrisonburg at a small private practice, and I think as far as kind of medicine, my goal was always to work for a private practice, just because during residency I was already very frustrated with others who are non-medical telling me what I should be and should not be doing. And so that was kind of my goal, and I love it there.
So the point of our podcast is kind of to discuss burnout within healthcare. And so Dr. Loucks, I was wondering if you could define for us how you would describe burnout or how you see it.
I think a lot of times burnout's that feeling that it doesn't matter how hard you try or how hard you work, it doesn't matter and you can't get the goal that you want. And that just leads to all the frustration.
Yeah, I think that's very similar to, I feel, even how, the med student that was on our podcast last week kind of described it. It's kind of this feeling of almost amotivation because you aren't succeeding in what you're trying to do. So that's really interesting.
And I think an interesting point that we've heard too is that it can affect your work in your practice, but also can affect your home life and how you live your every day. Do you agree with that statement?
Absolutely.
And then in terms of, kind of what Lauren is saying, like it's affecting your work life, your home life, is burnout a conversation that you necessarily have in the private practice that you're working in? And is it a conversation that you've had previously, maybe through residency or in medical school?
It's definitely something that I think's come up within residency. I haven't really discussed it with the other physicians that I work with, but definitely I have a group of physicians who are also mothers who work that I went to residency with, and we have our own little support group and talk almost daily, and probably the biggest struggle is that burnout and trying to find that balance of doing everything that has to be done for work while raising a young family, since we're all kind of in the same stage of family life as well.
Yeah, what do those conversations, I guess, kind of look like? Is it more sharing experiences, sharing frustrations, giving advice?
All of the above. And so definitely we all kind of go through and we all have our seasons. Lately the season has been our kids have been sick. And so when my friends was joking that she scrolled through our conversation over the prior week, and it just read like this never ending bad day. It was just illness and fever and vomiting and sleepless night after sleepless night. And so a lot of times it's just kind of having someone to vent and share the struggles with. Mm-hmm. And then I think we're going past that season, and actually lately we've been sharing kind of podcasts and different parenting tricks that worked for us, or just different things to try to make our days at the office a little bit smoother. And so a lot of different, just depends on, I guess, the day and our mood and kind of what we need for that day. And it's nice because if one of us is having a really bad day and just as that down and very pessimistic view, hopefully one of the others have had a good day and can kind of be more of that optimist and share some kind of proactive advice on something to do to try to improve and make the day better.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. I think it's very much, we've kind of experienced that being in medical school and having this friend group that we all turn to each other when things get rough. And it's nice, one, to have someone that feels like they're going through it with you, that really understand where you're coming from, but also having those people that can be like, hey, we're going to get through this, or here's a good thing that happened today. Let's, still think about the good things that we have happened, the good stories, the really nice patient interactions, or I really felt like I helped someone today. I really love medicine kind of ideas.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting and cool that you have this group of your peers who are going through the same experiences outside of work and also possibly at work too. And so I was wondering how that impacts your day-to-day life at work.
I think that's invaluable. Out of everything that's kept me sane through just the transition from residency to being in practice to just going through the pandemic was this group of friends, and we probably see each other every 3 years or so, but we text almost daily. And I thought it was great when we first graduated. I had my partners at my practice to ask some questions for and things like that, but there was some stupid questions that I didn't necessarily want to ask, the established partners in the practice who knew what they were doing. I wanted to ask someone who didn't know what they were doing and just kind of be like, am I really off base here, or run things by them? And so that part was invaluable during that transition. And so probably at that stage of life, we asked each other a whole lot more practical medical questions on what do I do for this kind of situation. And now it's more so probably kind of bouncing ideas on parenting and kids, because that's the medical part we've been all doing for 8 years now, and we're getting that part down a little bit more and have a lot more comfort with it, but we still bounce all kinds of ideas off of each other.
Yeah, and I think it's really nice that you have this group, but you did kind of mention that you guys don't really talk about this at work or with your partners at all. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like it's almost like you were saying that, they were a little bit more established when you kind of started? Is it almost like that there's still this stigma attached to feeling burnt out and kind of the inadequacy kind of felt with that prevents that from being a discussion?
Great question. I think some of it's just they're busy, and to go into their office and sit down and say, hey, let's have a conversation. They don't have time for that. They have patients to see. They want to get home. And so I know that their door's always open. And if I needed to, that they would be there. But they definitely, I don't know. They're all 15 years ahead in practice or more than I am. And I do think there's that different stigma of they're just keep on trucking and keep seeing patients and keep going. And at some point I'm like, oh, golly, how do you guys keep up with this pace? It's exhausting. And they just seem to be doing great with it. And so I do think sometimes that stigma and the mentality of how much of life should be devoted to work has changed, and I don't know, they seem to have a good grasp on it. Maybe 15 more years and I'll find that.
It was something that we were talking about in our last podcast a little bit too, was that we feel like the culture of medicine has definitely changed a lot in these last 5 to 10 years. Kind of starting when you were still like in residency medical school, about how it's become a little bit more humane. There's more emphasis on wellness and preventing this burnout that people feel. And so I wonder if that's also a part of it.
I definitely agree it could be part of it. I think I was either the first or second class that had the hour limits. Mm-hmm. And so it was a big shift because, the amount of pushback. I don't know. In my opinion, I'm like, these are great. There's no one who can be empathetic when they've been awake for 30 hours. Mm-hmm. Empathy was out the window. There was very little, care for the small little comforts, much less just life or death, because you're so tired. So I would think that the older people who had gone through it would have been thrilled. They achieved this and paved the way for younger doctors to have a better balance, but they were the ones that hated it the most. We had to do this. I don't know why you guys don't have to do this. And it's good for your learning to be able to push through and learn how to, run a code when you haven't slept for 2 days.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like it was almost like this rite of passage that they felt the younger generations of physicians needed to go through?
Sometimes it felt like a rite of passage, but sometimes, there's some surgical attendings who still do that and have that attitude where they work, 150 hours a week and are completely fine with doing that.
That just gives me anxiety here.
I know.
150 hours.
Here's my burnout. So I guess kind of switching gears a little bit, we had a couple of statistics that we found that we kind of wanted to present to you and kind of just hear your first thoughts to kind of hearing some of these stats.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the first stats that we were able to find in just doing our pretty extensive research in the idea of burnout in physicians was that evidence of burnout was found in about 42% of 15,000 U.S. physicians who responded to an online survey. Does that number kind of shock you, or do you feel like that's pretty, on brand for burnout statistics in the United States?
Yeah, I think doesn't surprise me.
And then an additional statistic that was found was that of those 44% that are feeling burnout, about 14% of those reported suicidal thoughts, and only 33% of those with suicidal thoughts actually sought treatment. Well, how do those numbers kind of, what goes through your head when you're hearing that?
It's, I think the lack of trying to seek out treatment is why does it matter? It's just that, it's just kind of that same mentality of just work 150 hours, just keep pushing, just keep pushing, just keep pushing. It's still kind of ingrained. And so, and that's the attitude. And you're thinking, I just need to push harder. I just need to work harder. I'm just not doing enough. If I just do some more, it keeps looking at those inner faults, and I remember when I was in residency, they would keep, there was a emphasis on wellness, and they would say, we'll have this hour a week to kind of reflect and try to do this and try to help the empathy and resiliency. And there's such an emphasis on resiliency and making the physician more resilient. And I'm like, no, I don't need to be more resilient. I don't need to change. The pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, the healthcare system is what needs to change. And I think at some point we just gotta, the doctors, we just keep pushing until you completely lose all hope, and then you quit or you find a different career path.
I think it's so interesting to hear from you about these things as someone who's out in the field now practicing, and you bring up the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance, and all of that we don't really have that much experience with. And I was wondering, how do you feel like those things specifically affect burnout in physicians?
I think a huge frustration. So when you asked me to be on this podcast, I was reflecting over kind of the last week and looking at how I was talking with patients and just kind of the time I was spending with my patients, because that's why I'm here, because I want to work with patients. And I think I do have some wisdom to offer. And I'm a firm believer that eating healthy foods and, diet and exercise, it's the best medicine. It is. It helps with everything. And I was reflecting on how I was spending my time conversing with my patients, and I found I spent more time talking to them about how to go to the pharmacy and pick up your medicine than I was on actual wellness. And so I spent all my time saying, this is the hoop we have to jump through for this prior auth. You know, for this medicine, you have to go through the pharmaceutical company. This one, you have to go through GoodRx. This one, you have to. And the amount of time I spent just helping my patients afford their medicine and pick it up so they can try it. Mm-hmm. The amount of time I filled out the papers for prior auths that kind of struck me this last week. And I was like, oh, wow. Think about if I just had this one extra hour a day to talk to patients about changing some of those habits, improving sleep and improving diet and nutrition, because there's a lot of misunderstandings in really smart people about nutrition. Mm-hmm. But, if only I had more time to focus on these things instead. And so that also causes that just frustration of, why bother? I can prescribe them the medicine, but these companies are getting rich off of all the junk in our food and just promoting this unhealthy lifestyle. And so again, it kind of goes back to that feeling, that overall feeling of why keep trying when there's nothing that I can do to truly make a difference because it's all still out there.
As a medical student now, like going into residency, I wonder, do you think training or just any sort of information about that kind of stuff during medical school would have been helpful?
I'm not sure how helpful it would be and it's changing constantly. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of times sometimes I don't know if there's been a price change until a patient literally comes back and tells me. And then you're like, oh, well, let me figure this out. And then you figure it out and then you just know for the next time. And so it's something that every year it's new, it's different, and trying to, figure out what changed with the new formularies and this insurance plan, that insurance plan. And so it's a lot just learning as you go through the day.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily that it was something you didn't expect, but it's something that's added on to your plate almost.
So Dr. Loucks, I read a study about a week ago that came out in May or March of 2022 that basically was talking about they proposed that lower physician tolerance of uncertainty was like a main driver of burnout in healthcare. And their study actually found a very significant association between having a lower tolerance of uncertainty with being a female gendered physician. They had it about 20% higher for females, as well as working in primary care practice, where they saw it about 50% higher. What are your kind of thoughts when you hear this as a female physician in primary care practice?
I guess I haven't heard that before, but I can definitely see the reasoning behind it, and I think just again in general, females tend to not be as authoritarian and not be, and I think it kind of goes with our style of practicing medicine again in general. Where you'll have the male doctor coming like, this is what you're going to do, and we're going to do this, and then we come in and like, well, I guess there's two different possibilities of ways we could treat this, and you can either do this or this, and so, and it depends on the patients on which one that works best for. This is definitely have some patients who want me to tell them what to do, and I have others who want to be part of that decision making. But then I think if you have that uncertainty, you also have that uncertainty in yourself. Am I doing a good job? Is what I'm doing, does it matter? Am I achieving my goals? And then you add the other part of kind of being a young female physician is we tend to have young families, which are very demanding on our time. And you add that uncertainty of, am I doing what's best for my child? I dropped them off at daycare and they cried every morning. And then I cry every morning, and then I go to work. And is it worth that? Am I helping my kids and showing them that you can be anything you want to be and you can make a difference? Or am I neglecting my kids to go work? And that's all that mix of uncertainty of what is best for you, your patients, your family, your children. And so, yeah, it's that self-doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was listening to a primary care podcast, and he's the reason I actually found this study. He was talking about it, and he kind of talks about like how primary care is kind of in a special position, I guess, to feel more uncertainty, because a lot of times we're the ones finding these issues, but we're not having all the means and all the ability to actually answer the questions. And sometimes he was kind of saying it's like you have to be okay with doing your best, even if your best isn't always enough, because you're still doing your best, and you're doing everything you can to help your patients. But there's sometimes that you can't know everything, especially in primary care where you see everything. You can't have every answer every time. And he was kind of like, you have to be okay with being able to tell your patients, I don't totally understand what's going on right now, but we're going to find the answer together, and we're going to do these tests and see if it helps, and we're going to do this imaging and see if it helps. But that level of uncertainty that's just higher in this field compared to other fields is just something that you almost have to, it's what you were talking about earlier, like gain that resiliency, that ability to continue to persevere in the face of not having all the answers. So.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think one of the things I say many times a day is, well, I don't know what's going on, so let's get more information. Let's get it figured out. And so this is what we're going to do to figure it out. And it's really frustrating when you're like, okay, in order to figure this out, you need a colonoscopy. Mm-hmm. That's going to be 5 months. And so I'm going to see you back every month for 5 months before, so we can make sure nothing scary is going on. We can, look at these other things and keep trying different medicines, even though I know what you need, but we just can't get that. And so it's frustrating for the patient. It's frustrating for me as I'm having to see them back, and I'm like, I can't help you. I know what you need, but I can't do anything for it. And so that is another fun layer.
Yeah. I mean, it almost kind of adds to that burnout. It's the fact that even when you know what the right next step, there are these powers at play that prevent you. There's not enough people doing colonoscopies. There's not enough spots. There's nursing shortages, so they don't have the staffing, even if they have the attending, to complete the procedure. So you're waiting 5 months for this, non-emergent, but still you need this to find answers to help this patient, and instead you're having to have them back so much more often instead of being able to get that answer quickly and get them treated. Mm-hmm. So it kind of adds to this, experience of burnout.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. And I think one of the scariest things is when I am truly scared for a patient, when I'm like, oh, there's something bad going on. Or I sit there and I'm like, I've told many patients, you have cancer. Just hang out for 2 weeks, because the next available appointment with oncology is 2 weeks from now. So just simmer with this diagnosis. And I don't know all the details. I don't know all the specific answers on for the questions they have on what's the next step and what's the medicine and prognosis. And I don't know all the specific things, but I can't get them in to see the oncologist for 2 weeks.
So it seems like it's almost, I think that's so true. And it's so useful for us as medical students to hear that, like the realities of practice, once we graduate and start to practice ourselves. But it almost seems like it's not necessarily an uncertainty in primary care. It's like this lack of resources that leads a lot to burnout. And as a physician in a more rural area, is that like at the forefront of your practice, you feel like?
I'm definitely trying to get access and care for patients, and it's one thing for people who have means, but there's this really fun rule where for Medicare to pay for transportation for a patient to a doctor's appointment, it has to be, don't quote me on the exact number, like 53 miles or less. What? UVA is 55 miles from us, and that is our closest referral center. And so none of my Medicare patients, if they don't drive or have family, can get to UVA for any resources. And so we do end up spending a lot of time, or, we make this appointment, it's scheduled, 4 months in advance, and then something happens to their driver and they can't make it. They're like, oh, it was my friend and something came up and she couldn't drive me, and so I missed the appointment. And I'm like, oh, we were waiting for that for like 4 months. Mm-hmm. Now what? And so, that's definitely a recurrent frustration, and just, it makes it very difficult. Which I get that rule if you live in a big city and you don't want them to be able to see a million different doctors. But for a more rural area, that rule is deadly to patients.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So kind of to, get an idea, we've been talking about burnout, and we've been talking about, the impacts on physicians, as well as, us as growing physicians in May. What would be your advice to us and, other growing medical students on how to address burnout, how to prevent burnout, and, what solidified things can we do and make changes to?
I mean, I'm a firm believer there's only so much that resiliency can do. And so as, getting a good night's sleep, mm-hmm. number one, the world is a better place after a good night's sleep. And so you can do that, and, and you can make sure you go into a field that you love and do it because you love it, and really try to set hard limits and say no so you don't get asked to do too much. But when it comes down to it, it's not going to get fixed by anything we individually can do. In general, practitioners tend to be very resilient people. We tend to be very, very dedicated, and we do take care of ourselves, and we do still find time to exercise and eat right and get as much sleep as possible. But a lot of those frustrations come from our system that's broken, and I think it has to get fixed. And until we get a huge overhaul, we're just going to kind of get beat up in the process, and we're going to have to try really hard to not, try to take a step back when needed, so we can keep going and be there when we need to be there. I do think one of the most beneficial things, and the thing that has saved me a couple times when I've had just those really rough patches where I'm just wonder if I'm in the right career and doing the right thing, is actually the continuity that I have with patients, and having them come back and tell me what you did mattered. Mm-hmm. And you listened to me when I had seen 10 other doctors and no one else took the time to listen and figure it out. You did. And so honestly, having that feedback from patients has been amazing. And so I feel very blessed that I do have, I have a patient panel that is mine. They are my patients. I see them. The other doctors don't see them. My clinic does an amazing job at making sure we have, that continuity with our patients. And that has been what's probably been the biggest thing to help me personally, is just getting those feedback stories. And they always tend to come on those days where literally you're just like, that's it, I quit, I'm done. And then like the next patient walks in the room and they're just like, thank you so much. You don't understand how much that meant to me. And I was just like, oh, I needed to hear that. Thank you. And so that has been just that patient experience has been awesome.
And I think that's so important for burnout in medicine in particular. And it's so heartening to hear that we can still have moments like this, even when we're running around crazy in a busy primary care practice, and we're still juggling trying to get these prior auths and arranging transportation and stuff like that, is finding those moments and really letting those help us heal too.
Yeah, kind of remembering that why.
Yeah.
The why we chose this, the why we wanted to do this. And a lot of it for many of us is because we love helping patients. We love being that person that they can actually rely on to try to do their best, to be on their side. And it's kind of like I heard before that someone called going into healthcare is almost like a vacation. It's, we are suited to be in this role. It's not because we're just choosing it willy-nilly. And it's kind of like our purpose. We feel fulfilled in our purpose of what we're doing by doing this job despite all of the hoops and hurdles and red tape that we have to jump through.
Mm-hmm. And that's why it's such a rewarding thing when, a patient does come back and they see that, because again, it's when you feel like you're working as hard as you can possibly do, and it just doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And then, someone comes back and says, oh, it did matter. It really did. Even though it took a long time to figure out how to get this medicine approved, I got it, and it is helping, and or just walking with patients on their journey. Sometimes I don't do anything and just take an extra couple minutes and listen. And it's been a wonderful journey. I truly love my patients. I joke that, it's my first job and it's my last job. And so I've had one real big person job in my life, and this is it. And I plan on retiring at the same practice I started at. And it's been amazing having patients for the last 8 years, and they haven't seen any doctor other than me or what I've set up. And for them to come in and I say, what would you like to do? And they say, whatever you say. I trust you. Mm-hmm. I believe in you. And I don't know, for someone who's in general older than me to show me that much respect and that, it's awesome. And seeing their compassion for me and just having that, relationship is been really awesome for me. And that's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Well, I have really appreciated being able to talk to you, and I know that I can echo kind of for all of us. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us on this podcast. I think it's been super enlightening to kind of hear the attending side and viewpoint and kind of what your experiences have been. So we just want to thank you again for being with us.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah. And to our listeners, we will see you next time.